All right, so this is gonna kind of be like a off the cuff, just ramble review here of Cyberpunk 2077. Um, it's been a couple of weeks now that I actually did finish the game finally. And I think that even now, like it's still something I am going back to thinking about just because it really did have that much of an impact on I guess the way that I wanted to think about the game. Um me, like many other people who ended up buying the game, bought it at launch. I was very hyped for the game, was very excited. I even was like planning on building a new computer in order to actually play it at the highest settings that I possibly could to get like the best experience out of it. Um, but the thing is, it came out at the time when it was really hard to actually build a new computer, so I still played it with my old computer. And it was still a great experience even at launch, despite the bugs. The bugs kind of really did ruin it for me, though. Um, like the many people out there who experienced glitches, I probably didn't experience as many as the people who were on the console version of the game. But I know I definitely experienced enough so that I took a step back and I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna wait until like the time comes that this game is more polished, because clearly it's not. So I did wait, and it ended up being that around now was the time to do it, and it really did kind of like spark interest in me again, like with many other people after watching the anime Edgerunners, because that show was just, it was just really good. Like with the game, I watched it and then I just kept thinking about it for like a while after, because it was just like the game was one thing, but the anime, it just had a really fast pace to it. But like there wasn't really anything that was put in there with no reason to be in there. And there was always something happening, but at the same time, it didn't feel like it was overwhelmingly throwing things at you. And it really was a good depiction of a cyberpunk genre, which is a genre of media that I do really enjoy. Is really why I was so invested in trying the game out at launch, because the whole idea of like a cyberpunk future is something I've always enjoyed, in games, even like Deus Ex. Like those games I think are also some games that are very good in the genre. And I definitely enjoyed my experience with Human Revolution the most, but the other games in the Deus Ex series I've also enjoyed, at least to an extent. Some are better than others, obviously, but anyways, going back to the anime, I finished it, and like I was saying, I just kept thinking about it. And I was saying like, okay, well, you know what? We'll wait until the DLC comes out and then I'll play it. And then I kept thinking about the game, and I was eventually just like, all right, you know what? I'll just play the game now. I kind of felt like I couldn't wait any longer. So I sit down. I still had my save file, which had around 24 hours of game time in it. But I decided, you know what? Let me just start fresh. The first time going through it, I got some crazy glitches. Like, I saved Dum Dum at All Foods, and then he just would not stop following me. So it's things like that. And I decided, you know what, let me just start from the beginning. I'll do the same life path of Nomad, just give it a fresh slate. And I actually do think that, looking at the life paths of Street Kid and Corpo, I think that Nomad's probably the most enjoyable, at least in my opinion. But I could see the appeal of the other two as well. Would I go through and play the game on those other two? Maybe at some point in the future. But anyways, so I started fresh, gave everything a fresh slate to start with. And, I think overall, I think that was a good idea because it refreshed my attention to the story. And if I had just hopped in from where I had last left off, I wouldn't have had the same attachment to like Jackie and all that throughout the heist. So I think that was a good idea. Speaking of the story, though, I think that the story, it's one of those things where, like, technically you don't have to do the side jobs and you don't have to do the gigs. But I really feel like you do have to get the side jobs and the gigs done. Gigs, not so much. Side jobs, definitely, yes. But you have to get them done to get the full experience of the story. Not only because some of the endings don't get unlocked if you don't do the side jobs, but also because just in general, there's some really great storylines that are being told in these side jobs. Like I really enjoyed Judy's side quests, where she eventually, at least in my playthrough, she eventually left Night City because I didn't romance her. I was playing a male V. And then I also really enjoyed Pan Am's side quests, which I did end up romancing her. And then, even Carrie's side jobs and River's side jobs. And then, even outside of theirs, there's like the Paralysis side jobs, which were an interesting step into like controversial, or not controversial, but like what's it called, conspiracy theories that people legitimately have in real life, and you're like seeing it happen in this world where it could happen. But yeah, just like a lot of the side jobs, some of them are not really like that impactful, but there's definitely a good amount of them that are really impactful, especially to the main storyline. So then when you actually do hop into the main storyline, you're like, okay, this is even better because I just did this side job with this person, and it now gives me this different perspective that I wouldn't have had otherwise on the main storyline. And I'm trying not to really spoil too much in the case that you're, thinking of playing the game and just trying to get some people's perspective on things. But basically, yeah, so that was my opinion on the story. But the story overall, I think that it's pretty good, like there's definitely some points that it's just not really great, like I think that a lot of people, myself included, kind of fall into the idea of, maybe wanting a happier ending to the endings. But I think that at the end of the day, it really does fit better into the cyberpunk genre to not have a completely happy ending, just because that's not the whole point of the genre. The whole point of the genre is that there aren't happy endings. It's not a Hollywood story where the characters get to the ending and then things are hunky-dory, like even Johnny Silverhand, he says, I won't be able to quote it properly, but it's like happy endings wrong city, wrong people, you know? Um, but yeah, like the characters, a lot of them are really actually written pretty well. Um, there's some interesting dialogue between you and Johnny. There's also some interesting dialogue between the other characters, and I would say, you know, it's not perfect. You know, like there's plenty of um dialogue parts of the, or like not necessarily dialogue, but parts of the relationships that you garner between, you know, the other characters like Johnny, where it's like it just doesn't really entirely make too much sense. But I think that's kind of more a limitation of it being a open world game at the same time, so you can't necessarily build up some of the relationships in a very linear way in the same way that you would be able to if it was a more linear game. But I think that considering it is an open world game, the relationships with the characters that you build really made it so that I actually had an attachment to these characters in a sense. So then when I get to the ending, I'm like, okay, well, now I have to say goodbye to all these characters basically because the story is ending. And I think that, you know, having that impactful of an ending where you really feel like you have to say goodbye to people that don't exist in the game, you know, because they are in the game, and not in real life. That is a game that I think at least left an imprint on you. You know, left an impression. So I think that was a success in that sense, and I look forward to seeing how they handle the DLC, because they said that one of the criticisms they got was that a lot of people didn't do the side jobs and just went through the main storyline, and then felt like the game was maybe a little short because of that. So they are going to learn from that and kind of try to incorporate more of the side missions into the DLC's main storyline so that it's a little better in terms of telling the actual story and not just letting you go straight to the ending, and, you know, rush through the main story. So we'll see how that goes. That comes out next year, so I'll definitely be playing it when it comes out, but you know. Anyways, moving on to like the gameplay though. Gameplay wise, you know, the game is a little janky. Um, there's some things that don't feel necessarily intended, and some things like driving out of the box just feel a little janky. I had to, well, I didn't have to, but I felt like I needed almost to install this mod that I did actually install that fixed the handling of vehicles in the game. But, you know, part of fixing that experience for me was also just getting better vehicles than the starting vehicles. Like I was just running around with the Mizutani Shion Coyote for the majority of the game, because I got that one early on. I kind of just looked up what would be like one of the better vehicles to get, and that ended up being one of them. So I got that one, and that one's very maneuverable, so that really made the driving not as bad. And actually I decided to kind of try to make a habit of not using the fast travel and just, you know, driving around the city, trying to immerse myself in everything going on, you know. And every now and then you would actually see a random glitch, you know, while driving around, so that'd be kind of funny to look at. But other than the driving, just like combat, I didn't really use very many of the guns except for the revolvers, and the pistols. And then when I got a specific pistol at the end, or a couple pistols at the end, I basically just used those two. And then I just had like a couple of other weapons to switch to, like a shotgun and a SMG, or an assault rifle. But I didn't really use the the guns that much. They do feel very satisfying to use. And I can imagine, especially if you're using something like Sandevistan, which slows down time, you can really have a good time with the guns and the melee weapons and everything. But what I primarily was doing was actually more so trying to play things a little stealthy and then also use net running abilities, because that kind of is something that I picked up ever since I started playing the immersive sim games. And this is not really an immersive sim game like Deus Ex, but you know, in games like Deus Ex or System Shock, you know, games like that that are in the immersive sim genre, um, I'll definitely go opt for like the hacking abilities, more so than the just straight up shooting abilities, because I will like to play those games a little more stealthy and everything. And I think that this game is one of those games that you can play it like that if you really want to, clearly, because I did play it like that. But at the same time, it's a game that really lets you just experiment. You know, you can do whatever you want. You can play the game however you want. You don't have to be constrained into one specific way of playing the game. You can just do whatever you'd like, and it'll most likely work. Um, there's going to be some points where you won't have the skill checks for certain dialogue options or options to get into buildings and have separate pathways and another pathway and things like that. But, you know, I didn't really feel like my experience was jeopardized by not using the weapons in the game as much. And I think that it was still a good experience. Like I said, the game is not entirely without its flaws. You know, the gameplay is a little janky sometimes, and AI can be a little dumb, but especially towards like the end of the game, like you kind of get to a point where you're just so powerful, regardless of what kind of gameplay you're going to try to build around. You just get so powerful that most enemies do not pose a threat at all, pretty much. Like I basically got to a point where I could sneak into a building, not kill actually, like knock out pretty much every enemy in the building, either by sneaking around and hacking them from a distance, or choking them out, or even, you know, just hacking into the camera system and knocking them out that way, and they wouldn't even find me in the first place. But yeah, like gameplay wise, it never really felt so much like a chore though, which is a good thing, because there's some games where the gameplay can start to feel like a chore, and I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that it just gives you a sandbox of things to choose from, and you can just approach things however you decide to, within some limitations obviously. But I think that really lends to a good amount of choices for gameplay, and you can pretty much always have something new to try. So that, I think, is where it had a success, and I'm glad they did it that way, because I think that most people can really enjoy a game when they do that. As for the audio and the soundtrack to the game, the audio for a lot of the like sound effects and all that, I think are very fitting. They did do a really good job with that, and I never really felt like there was an ability or anything like a gunshot that felt out of place. And like this is even with the guns that were more futuristic. They decided to try to make the guns sound a little, not alien, but like a little futuristic, and like not so much like a gun that actually exists. but also at the same time still kind of sounding like a gun that would exist potentially. And I think that that's good. The soundtrack though, that soundtrack you could tell had a lot of effort put into it. I actually have it on my phone and I've been listening to it in the car on my short commutes to work. Um, and it really is one of those soundtracks where, I was only listening to a couple of radio stations for the majority of the game. But every now and then when it would just switch to a different radio station, or even now when I'm constantly just, or not constantly, but every now and then when I'm just listening to the soundtrack on a shuffle, like the radio stations, it all seems like it would fit into the storyline somehow. And I think that they did a very good job in making sure that the radio songs were of a certain quality, so that they never felt so out of place. Granted, I can't really speak entirely for some of the genres I don't really listen to in real life, but I never really felt taken out of things because the song was, feeling out of place or anything like that. And as for the soundtrack outside of the radio stations, there's some really just like banger songs, especially for like combat and things like that. There's even some songs that sound like they would work even in a game like Doom Eternal, which has a much more fast-paced gameplay loop. And that is a compliment because Doom has a great soundtrack. Like, gotta love that game for its soundtrack. But yeah, like I said, considering I have it on my phone and I've been listening to it, that kind of speaks a little bit to the quality of the soundtrack, I'd say. And then, all things considered though, you gotta I have to at least acknowledge the glitches and the controversy surrounding this game, because it's not really so often that a game gets to the level of hype that this one had and then drops the ball so badly, and then subsequently also rises from the ashes in a sense, because that is what happened. It just had so much hype because it was announced so long ago and people were so excited for it. And then I think even if the game was released how it is now, people would be not very, happy about it, because the hype was just to such a point where anything that would come out would not be able to meet the expectations of people who were really hyped for the game. That being said, I think they did do a good job of at least fixing a lot of the big glaring issues. I do feel bad for the people who tried to buy it on console and play it at launch, especially because I don't think that the game should have really been designed for these older consoles in the first place, considering it's a little too ambitious for the hardware that those consoles have. Either that, or maybe if they had cut back on some of the design choices and things like that for those consoles, I'm sure they could have made it work somehow. But that's me speaking as someone who isn't really a game developer or anything like that, so take what I say there for as a at a grain of salt, or whatever they say. But yeah, I will say though, it was definitely pretty shady of them to in a sense kind of like lie about how things were for the game on the state of the game for the consoles. And it was definitely justified that people were upset about that, because like that's not cool to basically lie to people. And I think at the end of the day, it really just ends up being that the upper management wanted the game to come out at a specific time frame, but it got rushed. And I think it's Shigeru Miyamoto who made a quote one time saying that and this will be paraphrased basically, but that a delayed game can still come out as a good game eventually, but a game that comes out rushed is probably not going to be a good game. And I think that that kind of speaks volumes also just to the model of the game industry right now, that has been for a while now, where the game as you buy it is not 100% done a lot of the times and has to be updated to fix any issues. It's kind of like they're making the player base do the play testing that they would have otherwise done. And maybe this is just me coming from the generation that grew up in the transition between games being done when you buy them and not having the ability to have any updates, and then transitioning to being able to get updates to a game, but then developers deciding, okay, if we can just push out updates, let's not entirely finish things to completion in the same level of polish, because we can just fix any issues later on if we really need to. I would rather that games, try to fix as much as they can and then just make minor things here and there, but I can still commend CD Projekt Red for at the very least sticking with the game and not dropping it after the fact and continuing to update it even now, especially with the DLC coming out next year. So I would say that despite the controversy, I would still be excited for their next installment in the Cyberpunk universe, because I think that it probably would be good, especially since I think they will probably learn from their mistakes. I don't think that they'll want to have a repeat of this game's launch, so I think that most likely it'll be a lot better. But we'll have to see. That's probably not going to be for a while that sequel is going to come out, or maybe not sequel, but like another game in the franchise. They did say they're working on one, but definitely going to be a while before we see anything about that. Okay, and then to talk a bit about my ending with the game. If you don't want to be spoiled, I'll put a timestamp up here on what time to skip to. But I got what I feel like is one of the better endings in the game. I had romance Panam, and so I decided to call her at the end and have her basically help me get into Arasaka Tower. And then at the very end, you find out, oh, well, you only bought yourself 6 months more to live. So, cool story, bro, but you still gotta figure out your problems. And then you decide to leave Night City as well, and I think that was kind of the right move. I mean, you already saw it. I already saw it happen with Judy in my playthrough, where she left Night City and seemed a lot happier by doing so. So I was like, that makes sense that V would leave also, because I mean, the city basically ate him, chewed him, and then spat him out, But all the endings are pretty different. I think that the ending I got is the ending that I enjoy the most, but because they are so different, there's most likely another ending out there that you might enjoy more than the one that I got. it just seemed like what I got was like the best outcome. While at the same time I say that, but you know, my ending that I got still meant the death of a few people who were pretty big, important characters in the storylines of the game, which is unfortunate. But you know, going back to that quote that Johnny Silverhand says in the game, "Happy endings, wrong city, wrong people." It's not a game that's supposed to have a very happy ending, because at the end of the day, it's still in the cyberpunk genre, and the cyberpunk genre just doesn't really have happy endings. So I think that overall, most of the endings kind of just give you a bittersweet ending of some sort. You know, like there's some sort of triumph, but at the same time, some sort of sad, depressing news, aside from the fact that you're gonna die in 6 months unless you figure something out. But yeah, that was my opinion on the endings. I think that the endings, you know, actually were a lot more conclusive than some games out there, which really try to be more like building up to either like a sequel or, you know, be a little open-ended for interpretation. But probably because there were so many different choices for endings, they could actually give a little more of a conclusive ending. They did kind of hint that there's going to be a little something about the Crystal Palace at the end. But I don't know if they'll ever do something with that. I feel like V's storyline is basically over. And while the DLC next year is coming out, I don't think there's going to be another game about V, because his storyline was completely told in this game, and I think it would be better suited for the IP to just pick a different character entirely. But anyways, that is my opinion on the endings, and so I guess I'll just leave this off with some recommendations if someone is looking to play the game. I really recommend that if you are looking to play the game, then play it, because if you have any interest at all in the cyberpunk genre or just the game in general, I'd say at least play it, but give it a good bit of time before you give any conclusive choice on whether to stick with it or not, because that prologue is pretty long if you're taking your time. I would say in the prologue, don't go for any side jobs or gigs. Just do the main story all the way through the prologue, and then you can do things. And if you want to do it the way that I played it, I basically went around and did all the gigs first, then the side jobs, and then the main storyline until I opened up more gigs and side jobs, and then I did those. And then finally, at the very end, when I was done with all the gigs and side jobs, that's when I finished up the game's main storyline. But this is one of those games you can just play whatever way you want, whatever way you decide. I'm just giving the suggestion that you should do all the side jobs at the very least. And then there's a lot of story to be told in the gigs as well, so you might as well do them if you want to get some storyline. And benefit of doing all the gigs is also you get a lot of experience for doing them and some nice rewards, so it could be worth doing them as well. Another thing I could recommend is set aside time for the game. Don't decide, okay, let me play this game for like 30 minutes. I would say 30 minutes is not really enough to really immerse yourself in this game. Give yourself a couple of hours each session to do some stuff, get immersed in the game, and enjoy your time. Because this game, it really does deliver its storylines the best when you feel immersed in the storylines. Not to say you can't have a good time otherwise, if you do sit down for like 10, 15 minutes, but I feel like you just have a better time if you sit down for a couple of hours, rather than 15 to 30 minutes, because you'll feel more invested. Each session will feel a lot more lengthy because of the time, obviously. But, just take your time. Don't feel like you gotta rush anything, despite what the storyline might tell you. And, yeah, just, immerse yourself in it. That's really what the game is trying to do in the first place. So, yeah. I mean, I guess there's not really much else that I wanted to talk about in terms of the game. Just go ahead and play it, dude. Like, the game is actually pretty good. I'd say I would put the game up there in like probably top 10 games I've played. Probably not top 3, or maybe not even top 5, but top 10 for sure. And considering, like I was saying earlier, that it was a game that when I finished, it ended up being something that I kept thinking about for so long after. Even now to an extent, I would say that it's definitely a game that can leave an impression on you. And then even if you're looking at it from certain perspectives, it could change your perspective on life itself. But that's just depending on the person, of course. Yeah, just we'll just leave it on that, and yeah, go ahead and play the game, because I think that a lot of people really could enjoy the game. So anyways, we'll end that off here, because I'm just going to keep rambling otherwise if I don't cut it off. But if you guys enjoyed this, go ahead and leave a like, go ahead and comment, give me your opinion on the game if you've played it, or even if you haven't, kind of just give me your thoughts on things. And yeah, I guess if you wanted to take a look at the other things on the channel, you're more than welcome to. And if you see anything else you like, feel free to subscribe. No pressure though. Anyways, that's all for today, and I will see you all in the next video.